My big reason that I am nervous about the Houston Texans and the Colts this Sunday has nothing to do with really any matchup or anything like that. I think the Texans have a good chance of handling Anthony Richardson. I think the Colts, I think it's going to be tough for them to find answers to C.J. Stroud in this passing game. To the point of our conversation with Ross Tucker in the previous segment, I am kind of interested to see how the mouths all get fed on Sunday. I'm not nervous about any of that. What I'm nervous about is you people out there that are hammering the Texans at -2.5. How many of you? Well, I don't know the exact sheer volume in terms of bodies, but I can tell you in terms of percentages that out in Vegas and the various sports books across our great nation, 85% of the bets, 91% of the money are on the Houston Texans -2.5 on the road at Indiana. And Indy's not a bad team. They're not a bad team. Like, normally you're favored on the road by nearly a field goal. You're probably playing, unless you're the Chiefs and you're favored against everybody. Right. You're like the Texans, either the Colts are getting disrespected here or the Texans are getting incredible respect.
And I think whenever the public jumps on one side, like the public, this is where I know it makes you nervous. When the public jumps on one side, it's a lot of times an indication that people aren't thinking with their brains as much as their hearts and their guts, and it makes you nervous.
The house
I don't think it should make you nervous, Sean, in that look, the odds makers, as close as they actually saw this game, had it pretty close to an even matchup. Yeah. And a lot of that, that doesn't change. The Texans were favored on the road. I think the odds makers, and even if they had already adjusted for public perception at some point, I think they look at the Texans as right now a better team. If only you go by the fact that both have a lot of pluses on the offensive and defensive side of the ball. But C.J. Stroud is a much more proven commodity at this point than Anthony Richardson is. That's the giant wild card, is that nobody really knows just what Anthony Richardson is as a quarterback right now.
I agree with that. I think this is also a function of a kind of almost Texans infomercial that this offseason has been with pundits around the league. Everybody loves the Texans. They're everybody's surprise team. They're everybody's, new contender. They're the answer to many people's who can challenge the Chiefs in the AFC question. I think that has a lot to do with it as well. Like, there's the segment that we did like 2 weeks ago, where we took Joe Fortenbaugh's thoughts on the Texans on First Take. Joe Fortenbaugh's a betting expert on ESPN. And they had to do, who's the team that you think is going to be a disappointment? And he picked the Texans, and he had some reasons for it. I don't know if I totally agree with them, but they were sound, debatable reasons for why. I just remember doing that segment. I'm like, this is one of the only guys you can find right now in the national media who's saying this about the Texans. Right. Everybody else, for the most part, is saying that the Texans are ready to take that next step. And I think that's why the line started with the Colts were favored at one point in the offseason in this game by 1. This thing has gone through the 0 to the Texans now being -2.5.
I forgot that they were +1.
They were, the Colts were favored. The Colts were favored at one point during this offseason for the spread to move is one thing, but for the public to decide we don't think this team is going to win, that team is going to win, is a big deal.
And there's not anything really. I guess the one substantive thing that might have skewed things from the odds makers' perspective was Anthony Richardson in that final preseason game where he threw a pick six. I thought that from an Anthony Richardson perspective, going back and watching that game, and they're going versus the Bengals 2s and 3s. Like, honestly, in watching that game, it was a pain in the butt because I had to go back and find an old depth chart because half the guys on the Bengals defense aren't even on the Bengals team anymore. I thought I saw more good than bad, and I also think that Shane Steichen was specifically instructing Anthony Richardson not to run on a lot of the RPOs and the zone reads and things like that. So, I think that I think substantively nothing's changed. Other than that, Christian Harris isn't going to be available for sure, right. and Will Anderson is injured, so that shouldn't make it that heavily of a Texans favorite.
The injury report this week is an interesting one to see if I'm guessing, totally guessing, but Will Anderson should we hope for limited in practice? Like that would at least indicate that he's going to play this weekend?
All right. He's been running for a couple of weeks now, and I think he plays. I think right now it might be more gamesmanship than anything else that they're going to. We've seen this with the Texans. They've done a good job of it. They've held things close to the vest when it comes to, hey, Davis Mills is nobody knew for sure who was going to start that game against the Titans, and people assumed it was Davis Mills because the Texans didn't give out any information about it.
Yeah.
I think that I think he's going to play, but I think they're going to be very, very coy about it.
Yeah. I'm anxious to see how he's categorized going into this game, Will Anderson, with this ankle injury. Text message, I think Indy runs the ball down our throats. I hope not.
Right, and it's one thing, we talked about this a little bit earlier, because Shane Steichen is so good at the RPOs and because that puts your linebackers in such a bind, when you play against the Colts, I think there is a little bit of you instructing your linebackers to be very, very careful about being hyper-aggressive versus the run.
Mm-hmm.
This is one thing that Anthony Richardson does well. As raw and unpolished as he is as a passer, he's got incredible arm talent despite his weird delivery and everything else like that. He does have the ability to make really good throws, but he's also still very young in some respects and unpolished, both with his accuracy and some of his decision-making. But he's really good with his mechanics on the RPO side of things, executing his fakes, all of that. And I think in some regard, he is as tough as it was playing against Gardner Minshew in the RPOs, it's that much harder with Anthony Richardson. So I think they'll concede some yardage in the run game. I think it's going to be very much about, like, we can't get crushed with play action the way we did so much of last year. So I'm not sitting here saying that it's cool if Jonathan Taylor runs for 188 yards, but I think he's going to get I think he's going to eat a little bit.
That makes sense.